An adolescent boy, calm, polite and black, boards first class. A flight attendant accuses him of lying, slaps his hand, and pushes him to the back of the aircraft a few minutes later. She was unaware that he was a billionaire's son. And he prevents the entire plane from taking off with a single SMS. At 36,000 feet, what transpired next made an airline and each passenger confront reality. What you are about to see, my viewer, is not merely a tale. It is a potent illustration of the quiet strength and quest for justice in areas that most people overlook. If you've never been here before, please let me know where you're watching in the comment section below. Additionally, think about subscribing and clicking the bell symbol if you find tales like this to be thought-provoking, challenging, or moving. Every day we have voices that should be heard. I appreciate you being here. Let's start the story now. He silently passed through JFK International Airport's Gate 17. The sterile tile floor echoed with his footsteps. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his cap while he drew a hoodie. Just a 17-year-old lad traveling alone. No glitz, no entourage. He appeared to most people to be a peaceful adolescent who was fortunate enough to be on standby. A kind but unseen child with long limbs and keen eyes. He crossed the gold-plated first-class sign without anyone noticing. When he got onto the jet bridge, nobody asked. Not quite yet. Jalen was familiar with this routine. He didn't show off his name. Not in public. Not here in particular. Not right now in particular. He liked silence, stillness, and the serenity that came from being undervalued. People started telling on themselves at that point. You discovered the truth at that point. The scent of recycled air and citrus cleanser permeated every part of the aeroplane. Near the entryway, a flight attendant in her early 40s greeted every passenger with the same robotic smile. But something changed when their gazes locked. Deborah was written on her name badge. Mid-formation, her smile faltered. She cocked her head, evaluating. A hint of uncertainty appeared on her face. Boy, a hoodie by himself. Excellent. With a gentle nod, Jalen passed her without asking permission. The aisle, seat 1. The aisle appealed to him. It's easier to see everything. Taking care not to disturb anyone. He put his rucksack in the overhead bin. Then sat quietly and precisely. Nobody gave it a second glance. The man on the other side of him checked his timepiece. The woman on his left looked at her phone while holding a high-end purse. He felt the book before he opened it. The change, the silence, the sound of footsteps coming back. Deborah responded, "Excuse me," raising her voice just enough to assert her dominance. "I must examine your boarding pass." Startled but not perplexed, Jalen looked up. "It's right here," he added, displaying the digital pass on the screen of his phone. She kept her eyes off the TV. She glanced at him and said, "Not really." Then again at the pass. Then again at him as if the numbers didn't add up. "This is for first class," she stated firmly. "Yes," Jalen said coolly. Deborah folded her arms. "You're flying by yourself too." "Indeed." Her voice changed, becoming more acerbic. "Who purchased your ticket?" Still seated, Jalen blinked. "Does it really matter?" There was a long delay. Sensing anything was wrong, a few passengers turned to see. Deborah remained unflinching. Passengers expected a peaceful zone of decorum, but she moved closer. "I have to check with the gate. This appears out of the ordinary." Jalen remained motionless. "You are welcome to confirm. I'll hold off." Deborah, however, stayed away from the gate. She didn't make a supervisor call. She remained there as though his presence posed a threat to the seat itself. Then she did something that nobody had anticipated. She slapped the sides of his fingers as she stretched across him and grabbed the phone from his grasp. The cabin was filled with the sound of a loud, stinging pop. Gasp. The man in 1A raised his head from his newspaper. Nobody spoke, even though the woman with the fancy purse was staring. Jalen recoiled in disbelief rather than pain. "That wasn't necessary," he said. Deborah yelled, "You must accompany me." He got up slowly, picked up his rucksack and took the long, embarrassing aisle that he had witnessed far too many others do with averted gaze and whispers. Nobody intervened to stop her. Nobody intervened to stop him. Because they didn't want to become involved. Even those who felt something wasn't right remained silent. Because they might have believed her to be correct. Perhaps they convinced themselves that it was a miscommunication. He refrained from crying. He didn't speak out. Squeezed between two strangers in the last row. He simply picked an empty seat with the motor humming as his sole friend. Then he took out his phone, the one she hadn't been able to keep, from his backpack and typed a single line of text. She gave me a hand smack. I'm at the rear. He sent the message. A strange kind of storm started to form in a mirrored tower in Chicago, miles above the metropolitan skyline. Almost immediately the message was read. The man who was reading it didn't think twice. Elijah Monroe was the creator of 5 international tech firms. A quiet, methodical billionaire whose influence may be seen in half of the nation's digital infrastructure. In addition, he was Jalen's father. And he evolved into something more in this instant. He froze. The jet stopped moving after he made a single call. Just as it was about to taxi, the aircraft froze on the tarmac. The staff was told to postpone leaving. A series of notifications were set off when a code was input into the gate system. The captain, who had been flying for 15 years, saw a message inside the cockpit. Keep a gate open. Overrule by the executive. Don't leave. Perplexed, the captain turned to face his co-pilot. Override by the executive. The co-pilot said, yeah, with wide eyes. It was back in the last row after receiving a serious message from business. With his eyes closed, Jalen let the roar of the motors to subside. He was not grinning. He didn't become angry. He held out. He was aware that his father would not tolerate this. Deborah was up front, standing close to the galley, perplexed by the abrupt stop to work. A younger employee came over. She muttered, "We just got word we're being held." Deborah scowled. "Why? The weather is clear." The employee gave a shrug. "I have no idea. Something at the top. Perhaps you should speak with the captain." For the first time that morning, Deborah had a realization, a tightening in her chest, and a trembling that ran down her spine. Irreversible, acute, and slow. She had not just ejected a child from his seat. The seatbelt indicator hadn't even turned off yet, and she had embarrassed the wrong person. The quiet tempest that raged under Jalen's calm facade was far more intense than the dense silence in the aircraft's last row. The engine's low hum had turned into background noise, a sort of emotional static that reflected the distance he now felt, not just from his first-class seat, but also from the dignity that had been taken from him without a word of protest from anybody nearby. A crowd has never been necessary for Jalen. He didn't require confirmation. He was brought up to lead by being there, not by making noise. But ego has nothing to do with this. This was about a scene that kept coming back to him. The look, the smack, the order to move. He had not been affected by physical agony. It was the utter confidence that he didn't belong, the surety in Deborah's voice, the entitlement in her eyes. She made the decision without asking. Jalen felt every second pass like a reckoning taking shape as the jet sat immobile, caught between etiquette and consequence. The second update had been sent to the captain in the cockpit. It was succinct and straightforward. Elijah Monroe is the executive contact. Complete authority is given. Compliance is anticipated right away. The captain made no inquiries. Even though he had been a pilot for almost 20 years, he was able to identify gravity, and not simply the kind that dragged metal birds from the sky. "That boy in 1C, he mumbled to his co-pilot. "We relocated him." The co-pilot gave a nod. "It seems that he is the cause of our grounding." Beneath the glossy exterior of luxury travel, murmurs started to emerge in the cabin. "I heard she slapped him," a pearl-clad woman said as she leaned over to her husband. The flight was delayed as a result. The spouse, wearing a neat blazer and thinning gray hair, gave a languid shake of his head. Incredible. Deborah could feel her confidence eroding back in the galley. Her knuckles were white, Yet her hands were folded. She had acted instinctively. Years of subliminal clues, unspoken assessments, and looks she never questioned. It was never loud or direct. That was the risk involved. It referred to itself as experience and dressed itself in process. However, she suddenly had a strong feeling that something had changed, something she couldn't cover up with a serviette and an apology. And she hadn't even inquired about his name. Jalen's phone vibrated back in 39F. His father sent a message. Now they are aware. Remain seated. Don't say anything. Don't move unless instructed to. Let them learn from the stillness. He read it twice. Elijah Monroe rarely spoke, but when he did, it was with accuracy. Jalen had discovered that patience and the capacity to get others to pay attention without yelling were more powerful than loudness. A man in seat 3A tapped anxiously on his armrest. He had seen the boy shift. He had observed the flight attendant's demeanor, tone, and failure to verify anyone else's boarding ticket. He had remained silent. And suddenly his throat was burning with stillness. The youngster was staring straight ahead, as if he were accustomed to waiting for the world to catch up, when he turned back to look down the aisle. The intercom pinged abruptly. Deborah Lanning, please report to the cockpit. The voice was composed. Too calm, Deborah winced. Beside her, the younger flight attendant gave her a quick glance. You okay? Deborah nodded too quickly before taking a step forward while attempting to hide the terror that was seeping up her back. She saw the man in 1A drop his newspaper as she got closer to the front. His eyes followed her. Before she could knock, the cockpit door opened. It was impossible to read the captain's expression. Close the door, he commanded. He started talking again as soon as it clicked shut. The office of Mr. Elijah Monroe has contacted us. He is the father of the boy, Jalen. Deborah parted her lips, but nothing came out. The boarding verification procedure was not followed by you. You assumed things. You made contact with him. We are now grounded. She made an effort to clarify. It wasn't intended. What you meant is irrelevant. The captain cut in with a chilly voice. What you did counts. Mr. Monroe has asked that you either publicly apologize in front of the cabin or be removed from this aircraft right away. In front of the passengers, her breath caught. All of them, the captain replied. Jalen remained in row 39F. Once more his phone buzzed. His father sent him another note. She will soon walk down the aisle. Keep an eye on her, but keep your mouth shut. He sighed and tucked the phone into his pocket. As Deborah came back, the cabin resonated with her hesitant footsteps. The passengers looked away. Like a sudden draft across motionless air, the atmosphere changed. Her poise broke like porcelain as she moved gently. It was never loud or direct. That was the risk involved. It referred to itself as experience and dressed itself in process. However, she suddenly had a strong feeling that something had changed. Something she couldn't cover up with a serviette and an apology. And she hadn't even inquired about his name. Jalen's phone vibrated back in 39F. His father sent a message. Now they are aware. Remain seated. Don't say anything. Don't move unless instructed to. Let them learn from the stillness. He read it twice. Elijah Monroe rarely spoke, but when he did, it was with accuracy. Jalen had discovered that patience and the capacity to get others to pay attention without yelling were more powerful than loudness. A man in seat 3A tapped anxiously on his armrest. He had seen the boy shift. He had observed the flight attendant's demeanor, tone, and failure to verify anyone else's boarding ticket. He had remained silent. And suddenly his throat was burning with stillness. The youngster was staring straight ahead, as if he were accustomed to waiting for the world to catch up, when he turned back to look down the aisle. The intercom pinged abruptly. Deborah Lanning, please report to the cockpit. The voice was composed. Too calm, Deborah winced. Beside her, the younger flight attendant gave her a quick glance. You okay? Deborah nodded too quickly before taking a step forward while attempting to hide the terror that was seeping up her back. She saw the man in 1A drop his newspaper as she got closer to the front. His eyes followed her. Before she could knock, the cockpit door opened. It was impossible to read the captain's expression. "Close the door," he commanded. He started talking again as soon as it clicked shut. "The office of Mr. Elijah Monroe has contacted us. He is the father of the boy, Jalen." Deborah parted her lips, but nothing came out. "The boarding verification procedure was not followed by you. You assumed things. You made contact with him. We are now grounded." She made an effort to clarify. "It wasn't intended. What you meant is irrelevant." The captain cut in with a chilly voice. "What you did counts. Mr. Monroe has asked that you either publicly apologize in front of the cabin or be removed from this aircraft right away." In front of the passengers, her breath caught. "All of them," the captain replied. Jalen remained in row 39F. Once more his phone buzzed. His father sent him another note. "She will soon walk down the aisle. Keep an eye on her, but keep your mouth shut." He sighed and tucked the phone into his pocket. As Deborah came back, the cabin resonated with her hesitant footsteps. The passengers looked away. Like a sudden draft across motionless air, the atmosphere changed. Her poise broke like porcelain as she moved gently. Words weren't supposed to fix everything. No more. The captain received corporate's most recent message in the cockpit. The formal investigation had been started. Upon arrival, statements would be collected. An internal examination of boarding practices and in-flight behavior had been requested by the CEO himself. The message said, "This is a turning point." And the reason for this was that the truth was starting to descend with gravity from a great height. It was palpable to the passengers. The discomfort of their quiet now resounding louder than any engine. The burden of being witnesses. Jalen didn't want to talk to anyone. He had long since given up anticipating it. However, something was changing. The eyes that had before surveyed him suspiciously now lingered longer, not knowing how to look him in the eye or what they would discover if they did. Observing the condensation in his glass of water, he inhaled slowly. Taylor had filled that glass with grace earlier, but it had been more than just refreshment. It had been a restorative gesture. Attempting to balance a scale too frequently results in a slanted scale. A man in a blue suit leaned towards him from across the aisle. His tone was hesitant and low. "I remained silent previously. I ought to have. I apologize." Jalen gave him a composed glance. "Why didn't you?" The man let out a breath. "Because I didn't believe it would change anything. And that's not a justification. It's simply the reality. I didn't want things to go worse." Jalen answered. "It was already worse. It's not safer to be silent. All it does is muffle the damage." Slowly, the man reclined and took in the words. "Just be honest. Don't be defensive." Two younger passengers were watching a video that a passenger in the middle cabin had secretly uploaded on a phone screen farther back. It depicted Deborah's approach to Jalen. Her posture, tone, and voice were all present. The embarrassment was evident even if the slap was not captured on tape. In less than an hour, the video had already received 12,000 views, and that number was still rising. Elijah Monroe, Jalen's father, was speaking with the airline's board of directors in the meantime. He wasn't threatening to file a lawsuit. Not quite yet. He had no desire to demand firings or make headlines. He desired a shift. He desired systemic recognition that his son's experience wasn't unique. Calmly he added, "This isn't about one attendant. Has to do with a pattern. Additionally, you cannot use PR to resolve this. Unlearning what you believed professionalism to be is how you solve it." For the first time in almost an hour, Jalen moved in his seat once he was back aboard the aircraft. Instead of scrolling through his phone, he opened it to read his father's most recent message. "They're paying attention. Keep your head up." In response, he typed one line. "They shouldn't be terrified, in my opinion. I want them to know." Taylor returned to the cabin with a tray of beverages at that precise moment. Her heart wasn't steady, but her steps were. She walked past Jalen, stopped for a while and bent over. She said, "They're beginning to understand." Jalen gave a nod. "Some people will." The remainder. He did not complete the sentence. He didn't have to. Not everyone becomes aware at the same time. However, once it begins, it spreads silently and forcefully, like a slow shift in cabin pressure, until you are unable to ignore the alteration in your breathing. Something else was rising as the plane flew over the clouds. Consequence, not only for Deborah but for all the travelers who sat in that first-class compartment and saw a youngster deprived of his dignity before realizing too late that they were on the wrong side of history. And as the air gets thin, history, like altitude, has a way of revealing who you are. There's a little jolt as the wheels hit the pavement. However, Jalen Monroe did not have a sense of arrival. It was like being exposed. He gazed out the window at the familiar and uninterested metropolitan skyline beyond as the plane slowed to a crawl. The landing gear had performed as intended. However, the air in the cabin continued to feel thinner than it ought to. The air you breathe when you know that everyone is going to be staring at you. And they're all at a loss for words. Flight 421 was no longer just a trip. None of them would ever forget it. It was a moment that had revealed something raw and unnerving beneath the facade of comfort, not because of turbulence or a lost connection. Watching the terminal lights flicker through the window, Jalen sat silently in seat 39F. He was not considering repercussions or headlines. He was reflecting on how silence seemed more burdensome than conflict and how, even when things are resolved, there is still pain inside that is not visible. The silence was broken by the captain's voice. "Welcome to Denver International, ladies and gentlemen. While ground personnel gets the aircraft ready for arrival, we ask that you stay seated. Before disembarking, there will be a short wait. We are grateful for your patience." However, the cabin was not filled with patience. It was the kind of tension and awareness that remains in spaces where injustice has occurred and nobody is quite sure how to go without treading on the humiliation that has been left behind. Deborah stood still in the galley with her arms folded and her gaze fixed on the exit. Her badge was heavier than previously, and her clothing felt too tight. She had apologized. Even though she had guided him back, the previous events had not been reversed. Even worse, she was aware that it wouldn't. Taylor came over to her carrying a folded piece of paper that the captain had given her. "Final corporate directive. Until airline management escorts you, you must stay on board. Before departing the aircraft, kindly turn in your crew badge." As if skepticism might postpone reality, Deborah read the words once, then twice. She remained silent. She just dropped the metal badge into Taylor's open hand after unpinning it. There was a slight clink as its weight hit the ground, yet the sound reverberated through her. "I didn't mean," she said. However, Taylor interrupted her with a glance. "Just done, not harsh nor furious," Taylor remarked. "You didn't have to mean it. All you had to do was put an end to it before it happened." Deborah averted her gaze, her eyes unfocused. Protocol was no longer on her mind. She was recalling the expression on Jalen's face as she gave him a hand slap. How calm he had been, how much smaller she had felt when she recognized him. Someone with authority, not simply a black teenage lad wearing a hoodie. However, she was able to see what she had previously missed. It would have been wrong even if he hadn't had that link, that reach, or that last name. And that was the thing that most troubled her. The flight attendants in the cabin went slowly through the aisles, perhaps unsure of how to conclude a trip that had changed midway. Travelers shifted, looked at their phones, and glanced towards the rear, where Jalen stood motionless, seemingly unconcerned but marked with something more profound. In row 37, a woman leaned in the direction of her husband. "You think the airline will make a statement?" "I hope they do," he replied in a whisper. "However, I believe he has already produced the louder one." The hushed muttering around him went unanswered by Jalen. He was affected by everything, but he refused to let it affect him. He was expecting for something else. Not an apology or approval. Something that may never come. Comprehension. With a quiet hiss, the aircraft's door eventually opened, and a gate supervisor in uniform entered. A woman with an inscrutable countenance and a man in a navy jacket stood behind him with a clipboard. Unlike most of the time, they didn't walk straight to first class. Rather, they stopped, looked at the rear of the aircraft, and bided their time. "Passenger Monroe," said the manager. "You're invited to disembark last per request of corporate." Jalen nodded once, got up slowly, and picked up his rucksack. Every person who had previously gazed silently made room for him as he passed down the aisle, not just with their legs but also with their eyes. Now, instead of seeing him as the boy in row 39F, they saw him as the one who uncomfortably altered something in each of them. Heads turned as he went past. Unsure of what to say, a few mouths opened. "Thank you," a man muttered. A woman casually touched her chest. Another gave a slight nod. Not approval, not sympathy, just recognition. He had only ever desired that. The airline representative moved up at the front of the aircraft, speaking quietly. "We sincerely apologize, Mr. Monroe. If you're willing, our CEO would want to meet with you. We're determined to improve." Jalen hesitated before responding. "Don't begin with a meeting, then. Start with the individuals you employ. Teach them to focus on people rather than issues." The man nodded slowly, unable to find the right words. Jalen was confronted by the dawn light as soon as he disembarked from the aircraft. While he was in the air, something inside of him had altered, but the outside world had not. Perhaps, just possibly, something had also altered within those who were observing. Deborah waited by herself on the back jump seat. Now the cabin is vacant. The silence was just echoing, no longer consoling. Additionally, the ground didn't feel secure for the first time in her career, because it was asking her to respond to something she couldn't outrun for the first time. Not a protocol problem, not a delay, but a decision. And once decisions are made, their effects are permanent. Like he had done countless times before, Jalen strolled into the terminal. The floor underneath him felt different today, though. It was genuine in a way that required presence, not just tougher or colder. Unaware of what had transpired inside that jet only moments before, the throng swarmed around him. However, an unseen thread of looks, murmurs, and a quiet that had spoken louder than any intercom statement followed him. A slick black SUV was waiting at the gate, flanked by two people dressed in fitted suits, their faces bearing an air of control rather than hospitality. One of them came out and identified himself as the airline's senior executive liaison, Andrew Hole. Even while his tone was courteous, the weight of corporate unease was still audible. He started, "Mr. Monroe, we'd like to formally apologize and open the door for any further conversation you're willing to have with our leadership team." With his hands still on his bag's strap, Jalen hesitated. Calmly he said, "Dialogue is not what matters right now. Change does." They looked at each other, but they both nodded. Words were simple. It wouldn't be what followed. Without turning around, he got into the automobile. Even though the leather upholstery felt cool against his skin, his inner restlessness persisted. He considered the passengers who had observed, the woman who had hit his hand, and the people who would see the film and experience something. Anger, guilt, perhaps introspection. However, he also considered Taylor. At first, she hadn't spoken anything, but when she did, it wasn't scripted. It had been a human. A room full of courteous voices wasn't always as important as one honest one. His phone buzzed with another message from his father as the automobile moved away from the curb. "Inquiries from the media are increasing. The story will be within our control. You took the necessary action." Jalen took a while to respond. As the city faded by, he gazed out the window, unaware that they had just inherited a story that would extend beyond the aircraft, beyond the gate, and into something greater. 1,000 strangers went about their daily lives. A revolution is not always necessary. Sometimes all it takes is a rejection, a reluctance to be hushed, ignored, or invisible. Later that week, the airline issued a statement at headquarters that contained explicit instructions, mandatory anti-bias training, new boarding procedures, and a public apology addressed not only to Jalen but to all passengers who have ever been perceived as less than. Not everything was resolved by it. It was unable to. However, something was initiated. Jalen also refrained from appearing on camera. He didn't conduct interviews. He did, however, visit with youth organizations around the nation, sharing his experience, rather than his name, and teaching others how to stand without yelling. How to allow dignity to take the weight that rage can't always. It was the end of the flight. However, the effects had only barely started. Because it was more than just a plane that touched down that day. It was accurate. And once truth is seen, it never goes back to slumber. Jalen Monroe never intended to make a big impression. Like every other passenger, he boarded that aircraft. Calm, courteous, and merely attempting to move from one location to another. He was surprised by the verdict. The slap caught him off guard. And he most definitely did not anticipate becoming the focus of a lesson that the entire cabin and then the entire nation would have to witness. It wasn't just a miscommunication that occurred in Seat 1C. It was not a case of misidentification. It was a more subtle thing. A reflection of a reality that many people encounter on a daily basis but few have the opportunity to question. Jalen was evaluated based on his appearance rather than his words or actions. For having the audacity to be in a place where someone like him wasn't anticipated. But Jalen had something else, unlike a lot of people who confront that time by themselves. Not only luxury and access, but also a clear voice and a father who understood how to transform authority into responsibility. And that's when Jalen changed the whole dynamic by sending a simple message instead of making a fuss. Because someone was present this time. The smack that was intended to humiliate him instead made the injustice worse. And stillness didn't prevail this time. There was a delay in the flight. The narrative fell apart. More quickly than turbulence, the truth spread. After sitting in startled silence, passengers started to think. Once compliant flight attendants began to doubt the system. And an airline that had disregarded many minor humiliations was now compelled to pay attention because the voice they disregarded was supported by someone they couldn't. However, Jalen's money wasn't the true power in this tale. His familial name wasn't that. It was how he maintained his dignity in the face of attempts by others to undermine it. The manner in which he returned to the seat from which he had been expelled. Not with retaliation, but with silent intent. And how he reminded all the witnesses on that aircraft that a microphone is not always necessary for justice. Sometimes all it has to do is hold its ground. This was more than simply a private encounter. From the initial icy look to the last apologies. It was a public reckoning. And this is the question it poses. How frequently do we observe something improper and remain silent? How frequently do we rationalize our silence in the hopes that someone else will speak up? This is not merely a racial lesson. It has to do with acknowledgement. It's about keeping in mind that presence counts and that prejudice should never take precedence over dignity. That it is our duty to observe, speak, and change the narrative when someone is pushed to the back, either literally or figuratively. How can we use this in our daily lives, then? It begins modestly. Take a closer look. Don't make assumptions. Don't turn away if you witness someone being treated unfairly. Power is not necessary to change things. All you have to do is have the guts to look. Let Jalen's tale serve as a reminder that it is possible to end silence. Because opposition can roar even while it is quiet. It doesn't have to shout to be respected. All it has to do is stand. Please take a moment to support this channel if this tale touched you, caused you to reflect, or even caused you to pause. Click the subscribe button, enable the alert bell, and leave a comment below, letting us know where you are viewing. We can create more tales like this with each like and share. Stories that are important, inspirational, and serve as a reminder of what it is to be human. I appreciate you being here. Remain awake. Continue to be kind. Additionally, keep in mind that some flights alter more than their destinations.